Welcome to the Living Your Greatness podcast. I am your host, Ben Mummy. The purpose of the podcast is to inspire millions of people across the world to achieve greatness and enhance their overall personal well-being. Living Your Greatness is becoming the go-to resource that CEOs, elite athletes, professional coaches, and entrepreneurs rely on to upgrade themselves. The podcast helps you master the best of what other people have already figured out. So I gladly invite you to sit back, relax, and enjoy tuning in to today's episode. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Living Your Greatness. This is your host, Ben Mummy. Today we have a new guest to the show, and his name is Joey Cofone. So for those of you that don't know Joey, he is the founder and CEO of Baronfig, an award-winning designer and entrepreneur, and an author of his latest book called The Laws of Creativity. Joey has designed and art directed over 100 products from zero to launch. His work has been featured in Fast Company, Bloomberg, New York Magazine, Appétit, Quartz, Mashable, Gizmodo, and print, among many others. Joey was named a new visual artist and separately Wunderkind designer by Print magazine. Joey strives to make work that appeals to curious minds, work that is beautiful, smart, and communicative. He believes that design is the least of a designer's worries, that story is the heart of all tasks, and jumping off cliffs is the only way to grow. So Joey, welcome to the show. It is a pleasure, my friend, to have you with us today.
I should send over like an abbreviated version, but I appreciate all the props. I guess that's some kind of like self props because I sent it to you. So thank you for having me. I'm excited to chat.
Same here, Joey. I'm super stoked to have you on. What I'm always excited to start off with the first question is really getting to know the person a little bit better. So tell us a little bit about yourself. Where did you spend your formative years growing up? And what inspired you to become an award-winning designer and entrepreneur?
Well, first of all, I'm only 35, so I have a long time to screw it up still. You know, whenever anyone says, man, nice work, I still got good 20 years to F this whole thing up. But how did it all come to be? It's a great question. I started reading when I was very young, and I think the passion for ideas has driven everything. I started reading like before pre-K. I think I was like 3 or 4, and it just like consumed at that time like couple hundred books a year just because I read all the time. I read in class, like with the book below my desk. I was a troublemaker because of books, which is interesting. And anyway, when you fast forward, I was an English major, literature, philosophy, then I did design, and then I put it all together and I made Baronfig, you know, a company that helps you do your best thinking. That's been my mission. And then recently I wrote The Laws of Creativity, a book that teaches you how to master your ideas. And you know, you can see there's a through line there of helping people turn their ideas into reality. And I'm ready to answer your questions, man. I'm ready to do whatever you say. Like there is pretty much nothing is off limits.
Thanks for giving us a little bit of background, of who you are and how you got originally inspired about creativity. Could you share that story that you have about how a worm taught you how to be creative?
Oh, yes. So fast forward to first grade, and I walk into class, and the teacher, I guess it was a Monday, we probably did the bulletin board every week. And so she handed us all a worksheet that we had to color and cut out and put on the board. And this week's was a worm, cartoon worm. And so I colored him, and I guess I took a while because by the time I was ready to put mine up, most students already had theirs on the board. And as I was going up and I looked and I realized, oh man, like mine is going to be the same as everyone else's if I put this up, even though we're using different colors and whatever, like in as a group, mine would just blend in. And for some reason, 7-year-old Joey could not stomach that. And I walked back to my desk sulking. The guy was almost crying, actually. Something just hit me hard where I could not allow myself to be one of many at that time. So head in hands, I'm like, I'm close to tears. I'm looking at my desk. and I noticed that there's all these shards of paper that were left over from cutting out the worm, and a bright light ticked on, and I realized that I could use those. And so that's what I did. I drew a boombox, a microphone, and a necklace. I colored them, cut them out, put them on the worm, and then I put my worm on the board. And I'll never forget, the teacher was behind me. All the students kind of came up, and she said, just simply, wow, I've never seen anything like it. And that moment, I became addicted to the feeling of doing things differently. And it changed the course of my life forever, because now from then on, whenever I was doing things, I wanted to get that reaction again. And so you fast forward, what is it now? Almost 30 years, and built a company around it, wrote a book about that whole journey. And it all is traced back to the one moment.
I love that story because I was reading it, before preparing for this interview. And, I was curious, how did this really play into your life, right? Because everyone has a story. And I think that was a great example of where you acted different, or if we could say, quote unquote, you chose to be weird, right? Do something different. And that kind of evolved later on in life, right? Which I think is really cool. And I know when we dive into your book later, I know choosing to be weird is one aspect too, in terms of one of your laws. But before we dive into today's chat a little bit more here, I think it is important for our listeners to better understand the word creativity. So Joey, how would you define creativity, and why does it matter so much to you?
Sure. It's a loaded question, and it's a loaded word, because there's so many thoughts on what creativity is and who should be using it or employing it. But the simplest way that I put it is that creativity is the practice of ideas. And when you employ it, it's self-expression. And that's it, plain and simple. Now, unfortunately, people think that creativity is something that artists are alone concerned with, like painters and designers or illustrators, but that's not true at all. Every day you have, I think it's 6,000 thoughts, and whether you want to or not, and those thoughts are ideas. And with a few tweaks, you can shift your mindset to start to take advantage of those, because creativity is the practice of ideas, and all of a sudden take advantage of thoughts you're already having. Because at the end of the day, people who employ creativity, kids are more likely to graduate. Adults actually literally make more money statistically, and they're happier. And companies record more growth and profits. So across the board, creativity, when it's employed, is truly beneficial and an asset. And I think it's curious that people don't readily feel that that's the case. And I wrote the book to combat that misbelief.
That's awesome. I love that. I think you nailed it in terms of people's misconception, right? Of thinking that they're doubtly not creative. Kind of like you said, right? It has to be maybe, an artist or something like that, or like Picasso, right? All these names that we hear, right?
Yeah.
Of these creative geniuses. But really, I definitely am aligned with you in terms of, I think it's more like an ability, a skill set, a practice, right? And how do we foster that, right? So I actually wanted to share with you a quote on creativity, and you're probably familiar with this individual, but a British author and public speaker, Ken Robinson, once said, "Everyone is born with tremendous capabilities for creativity. The trick is, though, to develop these capabilities. Creativity is much like literacy." So I know you believe that creativity is not magic, but rather a reliable practice that anyone can harness. So how have you used creativity to not only build your professional life, but as well as your entrepreneurship journey?
Yeah, sure. There's a lot there. Love the quote. There's another one that I totally don't remember who said it or even the exact words, but it was essentially, everyone is born creative, keeping it is the challenge, actual challenge or something. And that reminds me of when I first started organizing my thoughts for this book. I was working with someone at Baronfig, Andy Tallarico, and her and I were just researching data points on creativity, like just to get a foothold for like, what am I, how do I prove that this is worth it? And we talked a little bit about making more money and being happier, and those are all data points. But there was a cornerstone piece of data that she found, that when we encountered it, we realized that this is the book. This is the heart of the book. And it's probably something you're familiar with, but NASA did a study that found that 98% of kids are creative genius levels. By adulthood, that goes to, all right, you ready, listeners? Take a guess. What do you think? From 98% down to what? The answer is, drumroll, 2%. Essentially, kids are creative geniuses, and then society is almost guarantees that we lose it. It beats it out of us. And there's so many directions we could go with this. And I'll leave it to you if you want me to set that aside and talk more about how creativity, because the original question was, how did I employ it? Where do you want me to go next? Because I can go.
I want you to go any way you want right now. There are no rules.
Okay, man. Oh, dude, if there's one thing I could do, it's talk. When I was in school, the teachers used to create a category on my report card. They would there was attendance, and then, participation, all these other things. And it would be in like a grid. Well, they would actually write a new category called talking, and then give me the lowest grade possible. They drew it in, as in like, this kid never shuts up. So I can certainly go, and I will address what I started with the NASA point, which is, why do we go from 98% to 2%? That's not an accident. If it was 98 to 80%, okay, some people lose it. Then we could say, well, what part of society, what certain avenue do some people take that loses it? But it's not the case. It is like 98 down to nothing, pretty much. So we are systematically, perfectly eradicating creativity at the genius level, let's say. So there's 3 reasons that I've uncovered. The first, we're taught that authority is unquestionable, right? So teachers, your parents, you can't question. So right away, it's a do what I say, no matter what. And so you lose the power to imagine new options. Second is that man-made rules are followed to a fault. Again, we are served up a world that we are taught cannot be changed by us, right? Follow the rules. That's it. You don't break them, you don't bend them. And the third, which I find the most damaging of all, is that we are taught that the end is visible from the start. And that's kind of the most abstract, and I'm going to bring it down to earth real easy, which essentially, think about when you're in school, you're given a book, read Fahrenheit 451, write 3-page paper on the summary of it. Cool. Before I do anything, I know where I'm going to end up. I'll read the book. I'll have 3 pages on the plot, maybe an opinion on what I learned, and I'm done. Same thing with math. Here's 3 geometry proofs. Solve them. Then you go to work. You show up on Monday. Here's what we need you to do by Friday. Every avenue of our life has taught us to see where we go, where we end up before we start. Creativity is the exact opposite. It is essentially going into the unknown all the time. It's how you create something new. By its very nature, you can't know what it is when you begin. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I love the way that you said how it goes into the unknown creativity, because a really good example that I could think of, I remember when I was in college, I was taking for the first time, probably since I was a kid, probably since I was 5, a painting course. And I remember the painting that I was able to, realize after a couple of sessions that I was, let's say, good at or pretty good at or getting better at was abstract, because that process of, you don't really know how the final product is going to turn, right? But with time, as you keep going and you're putting the hours and you hit afloat state and all these aspects, right, and experiences, you eventually get there. And I always found through abstract painting, that was something that was really fascinating, is the fact that there's no one size fits all approach. There's no, rules, right? It's very
no right
free.
way.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
So I definitely resonated with that. Something
totally.
that I want to move to, Joey, is you've just launched a book, The Laws of Creativity. I really do think that your subtitle indicates your mission, of trying to help people unlock their originality and also awaken their creative genius. Something that I admire, though, about your book is the practicality that it brings to the reader. The book is filled with principles that are backed by research, experimentation, and life lessons. What was your why behind writing this book?
Good question. This book was not supposed to be written just yet. I started taking notes 10 years ago at the suggestion of Baronfig's co-founder Adam Cornfield, when I started talking about these things that I was seeing, where uh, I would ask people, "Hey, are you creative?" And they'd say no, and it was like 99% of people were saying that. Whereas it was very obvious that then they would go and do things that were quite creative. Even just reorganizing your living room and the furniture in it, and putting the right paintings up and buying things, like that's a creative expression. That's like, people don't understand necessarily. And so I took notes for 10 years. At some point during the pandemic, I brought it up to my wife, Ariana. And now I'm talking about this book, and I've been talking about it for years. And so she stops me and she says, "Hold on, dude. If you don't write this now, you're never going to write it, because I'm never going to get the opportunity where literally the whole world is asked to stay inside. And the amount of extra time that we all have, no commuting, no hanging out, no going to dinner, no going to the movies, just nothing but staying at home." She said, "If you don't take advantage of this now, man, when are you going to write this book?" And so, combining with this interest that I had forever, for starting at 7 years old, took all these notes. I'm at home, like all of us, we're stuck. Everybody picks up new hobbies. I decided I'm going to write this book. And so within a few hours, I think it was like 3 hours, I took all these 10 years of notes and I organized the table of contents. And that's what you see in the book today. It was just, it was something I had brooded on and thought about for so long that it just came together. And, I'm grateful, because if I were to go write another book, I don't have 10 years of notes on something else. So it's very different. And that's how it came to be. And I spent the pandemic, guiding the team through a lot of challenges with my COO, Jay Desai, and remote work for the first time, as of course all of us are doing this, and figuring out logistics problems. And then at the end of the day, when that hit, I think at the time 5 o'clock, where we were calling it, then I would put down my laptop and pick up actually my iPad. I wrote it on my iPad with a keyboard, and I would start writing. And then every night after all the work, I would write. And on the weekend, I wrote. And 11 months later, the first draft popped out. And then that was kind of the hardest point.
Thanks for sharing your why. I love this wasn't just out of nowhere, that again, there was intention, there was
Yeah.
purpose. And it sounds like too, it's been part of your life, right? This has been going not only when you were younger, but even now in your adulthood, where you're realizing like, oh my God, there's so much creativity that I see in life here. And I have to share this. I have to share these lessons from, people I've worked with, or I have to share these stories from stories I've read about, right? People that I resonate with, right? So I love too that your book, like I said, there's practicality, there's laws, but then there's storytelling. And a lot of us know now too, there's so much research we learn so well with storytelling. I love how too, you break into your book different parts, right? And in part one, it's called, the foundation, right? So you write about the laws of mindset, right? And how important that is. And these laws that provide, the bedrock for approaching any creative act. So, Joey, what are some of the laws that someone can use to think more creatively and generate endless ideas?
Yeah, that's a great question. I have so much to say. First of all, I'll lay the groundwork for your listeners, and I'll say that there's 39 laws in this book across 3 sections: foundation, process, and excellence. And each law starts with the story from history and, or modern times. And my goal was actually, number one, is to entertain you and tell you something you didn't know, or tell you something new about what you thought you knew, essentially. So I entertain, and then it breaks down what you just read. And then I go into principles and practical applications. And I felt that it was incredibly important to address something you said earlier about being practical and actually taking all of these abstract ideas and bringing them down to earth in a way that I could say, hey, I'm not just here to BS you. I'm not just here to throw out fluff about like, you're so unique. But actually I can prove it, and I can have you prove it to yourself, and I could do it in like a half a page. And so the whole book is filled with stories, breakdowns, principles, and ultimately practical approaches that you can use so that really anybody can do this. Now, you asked me, what is the way to start generating endless ideas? And I'd be remiss if I didn't say like it starts with chapter 1 with the foundation. The first part, foundation, was actually not really part of what I thought how I was going to write the book until I did some research. So again, there's foundation, process, and excellence. Foundation is 7 chapters. Process is the bulk of the book. It's 18 chapters. And that's how to create from start to finish, like literally a step-by-step set of laws. I thought that was going to be really what my book was about until I started interviewing people who considered themselves non-creative. And I realized just how important their mindset is, because they knew how to create. They knew what the process entailed, but it was their perspective on it, their mindset and their thinking that was actually significantly off. Whereas the process was like, 10% off, their thinking was like 100% off. They're just so wrong. So to give you an example, chapter 1 is Be Weird, and it's the law of expression. And it says, embrace the parts of you that others call weird. Don't hide what makes you different. Allow these parts to float to the top and be seen by all. Your uniqueness is what makes your creations original, effective, and memorable. And is it okay if I go into the practical aspect of that one?
Go for it.
Sweet. Okay, cool. So everybody bear with me. There is just a tiny bit of math involved, but we got this. So let's imagine, there's someone, a listener out there. I want you to take 3 interests, okay? And I'm going to do my own interests just to make it easy. But let's say, for movie, I got The Matrix. For a video game, I got Legend of Zelda. And for a book, I've got Dune. Okay, these are things I really dig. And think for you what it could be. I'm going to limit, even though there's a shitload of options, I'm going to limit it to just 1,000 each. Okay. The combinations with those 3 items, the permutations, are 1 billion. Okay. Now, before we did this exercise, you were one person in 8 billion on the planet. After this exercise, because you now know that you have these 3 interests, and if you get them into your creation with 1 billion permutations, you become 1 in 8 people. Already your uniqueness skyrockets. There's only, let's say, 7 other people like you on the planet. Now, if we add a 4th item, and let's say favorite food for me is macaroni and cheese, always and forever, my heart will go on. And now that's 1 trillion combinations. That's 128 times the population of Earth. I know it's a lot of math, but the point that you need to come away with is that now, just with 4 items, 4 interests that I can inject into what I make, you become exceptionally unique. Like literally, there is no one like you mathematically. And so if you take, what I did in my life with Baronfig, I have an obsession with literature. I have an obsession with philosophy. I have an obsession with notebooks. Excuse me. And I actually have an obsession with helping others. So with those 4 things, I created Baronfig, and there are other notebook companies, but there are not other notebook companies doing it my way. And so Baronfig becomes unique. And that's why we've been around so far for 10 years. On Kickstarter back in 2013, we were looking for $15,000. We did $168,000 in 30 days. That was a lot for 2013. So my point is, when you recognize that putting your uniqueness into what you do putting what you or other people sometimes look at as, oh, that's the weird part that you want to hide. But if you actually put that into what you do, your creations, your expressions become unlike anyone else's. And that is when you leverage that. That is what makes you different, unique, valuable, interesting. And, if we wanted to bring it down to ultra practical terminology, more successful.
I love that. Even taking all those different passions or things that they're so kind of like you said, obsessed about, I really do think that passion bleeds into uniqueness. Thanks for kind of sharing, about, how Baronfig applied that. I love that. Now that we've talked about, the foundation, which obviously there's so many more great laws that you've kind of outlined in your book, I want to move now to part 2, which is about process. You write about these laws of action, and, action is so important if we want to actually be creating something, right? And moving forward and doing and getting better, right? So these set laws encompass, any creative act from start to finish. What are some of the laws that someone can use to unleash the full power of creative process and go from nothing to something every time?
If I were to be super straightforward, it would be every law, right? It takes every law to do this. And, there's 39 laws in the book, like I said, and I have been asked more than once, dude, why didn't you do, one more law is 40, dude, it's an even number. Like, what's wrong with, what's going on? And my answer is that I didn't create any of this. I observed it. So, like Newton observed the law of gravity. The dude did not invent gravity. I did not invent these laws. And so, it does take all of them. This is chapter 8 through 25. There's 18 steps. And, it's about it starts with being more curious, okay, with the law of curiosity and asking more questions, and it's the only way to know what is not known is by asking, right? By inquiring, whether you research or talk to people. So don't fear answers. They hold no power over you. Questions are journeys, and the ones worth going on hold unknown destinations. And then it teaches you how to, when you find a problem, it teaches you how to define it. And then it teaches you how to gather inspiration. What are ideas that you can borrow from in order to better attack the problem at hand? And then it actually takes you, so you have this explosion of information. And then the very next chapter is the law of simplicity, where it tells you to limit yourself. So it's as an explosion, it becomes an implosion. And it goes right back to the center of your idea. And it just keeps on going. But I think what I do want to convey to people, more importantly, is what powers this section, is part 2, the process, which is, imagine, have you ever been to Berlin?
I have, actually. Yeah.
Okay. Damn, you're the first one. How about, let's see, Tokyo? Have you been to Tokyo too?
I have not been to Tokyo.
Okay. Yes.
Tell me about Tokyo. Let's go.
Okay. I don't know a damn thing about Tokyo. I've never been there either. But here's the thing, Ben. If I told you, like, yo, dude, we're going to Tokyo, you and me, you would know how to get to Tokyo. Okay. Wherever you are, you would hop on, you'd walk to the airport, ride to the airport, take a car, take a bus, get on a plane. I would do the same. We'd meet up at the airport in Tokyo. We'd follow signs and roads and get to our hotel. And then we'd have a good time after that. Creativity is the same thing, where even though you don't know the destination, even though I don't know what's in Tokyo, I know how to get there. When you're creating, even though you don't know what you're going to end up with, the process to get there is the same. And that's this part 2, is all these laws that tell you basically the roads and signs and, travel methods to find your destination. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah. I love that. I love that.
Now I do want to go to Tokyo.
I know, Joey, we're going to have to make this happen, eh? Next time we meet, especially in person, we're going to have to meet up in Tokyo. Okay.
Oh, dude, that's a tall order, but I'm down with it.
Love it. Love it. What would be one example of one of the laws on, taking action?
Sure. In terms of the process, let's see, what is a fun one that I want to talk about? Let's see. There's so many. I like this one. The law of plain sight. Many answers lie in the open. They don't need to be uncovered, but recognized. And fight the urge to discount ideas that are not derived from toil. Okay. This is a big one. So I'm a designer by trade. My background is in design and I guess writing. And I have been in so many meetings in which people have said to me, that answer's obvious, as if that should discount the answer. Okay. And those two examples I want to give, number one is the most valuable company on the planet. Do you know what it is?
No, I don't.
Well, at least the most valuable, consumer product company. It's Apple.
Mm-hmm.
And what's the logo?
An apple.
An apple. Right? No one ever said, oh, Apple, not clever enough. No, it's when you see an apple and you think Apple, the job is done. But there are many people who would say, oh my goodness, that's too obvious. And that's not the case. And so I tell a story in this chapter of a designer named Paula Scher, who is in a boardroom with a bunch of people in suits who are all trying to figure out how they can merge two companies. I think it was called Citibank and Travelers at the time. And Paula Scher is sitting there listening to everyone talk, and she's being very calm and gracious and hearing all these ideas about how she can merge these brands into one. And then about an hour later, she has a napkin right next to her with a glass of water. She moves the water. She pulls the napkin closer. She busts out her pen. She draws a logo, and it ends up being the Citi logo we know today. CITI with the red arc over the T. And she passes it to someone in charge and says, I think this is the answer. And lo and behold, that is the logo we have today. And they said to her, did we just pay you $2 million for 60 minutes? And she said, no, you paid me $2 million for 40 years of experience. And so what I'm getting at is that the more you know, the more things that are obvious, and that doesn't make it bad. So, for example, Ben, when you're hungry, what do?
I get food. I feel my hunger.
Exactly. Is that too obvious of a solution? Absolutely not. It's the right answer. And it's because we are masters of operating the machine, the organic machine that is the human body. And so when you think about that, well, okay, I start to apply this to other things. As I get older and as I get more experienced, more things are going to be obvious. And so the law of plain sight reminds you that the things that are obvious to you, number one, are valid, and number two, might not be obvious to other people. And that's one I really like. So to throw that out there.
I love that. Thanks for sharing that there, Joey. Something that I want to move to now is I want to go to part 3 of your book, on excellence. And I really love this part because, you write about the laws of greatness. And what I've had a pleasure doing, on my podcast is, bringing on a lot of really interesting individuals who have learned how to go from good to great and making that strive and kind of what separates those differences, right? Those little habits or routines, etc. And I know some of these laws that you actually created in your book were inspired by world-class performers that you have worked with. What are some of the laws that someone can use to rise above the rest and awaken their creative genius? Do you want to share a couple of them?
Sure. I'll share a pair that go together. So oftentimes the way society stereotypes individuals in terms of their propensity towards operating in life is you have people who are very productive and left brain, or you have people who are very creative and right brain. And then there's a lot of negative that goes with them, which is the creative people, can't hold a job, can't make money. And then the left brain people are productive, but they could, the stereotype again is less fulfilled, or something like that. And I write 2 chapters back to back about the law of order and the law of chaos. And it's essentially one is about discipline and the other is about impulse. And what I have discovered is the importance of having both. Having discipline alone means you're very good at planning, you're very good at getting things done. However, it can sometimes be at the sake of what's right in front of you. So if we've all heard of people who plan their whole life, right? I'm going to get the car, the job, then I'm going to get the car, then I'm going to get the partner, then I'm going to get the kid and the fence and the house, right? And people have a very, very, very clear idea. Then something happens that rocks their world, and they can't call an audible and adjust, right? That is discipline at the sake of impulse. And that's no good because you are not having a conversation with the present moment. On the flip side, the law of chaos is all about impulse, which is traditionally looked at as has a negative connotation. Impulsivity. This person's impulsive, but actually, some of the most incredible discoveries have been on impulse. Marie Curie, when she discovered radioactivity and she discovered 2 new elements, she didn't plan that. She recognized something wasn't going according to expectations. And instead of researching down the path she intended, she switched to something else and discovered polonium and radium. Twice it happened, which is just absolutely wild. Ella Fitzgerald she was actually living on the streets, and she went to a local talent show in Harlem, and she was on the stage and she was going to dance. She planned out her whole dance, and then she was next up. And right before she went, she watched these 2 professionals, 2 sisters, do an incredible dance. And she was like, I can't follow that. And then her name was called. And she goes out on stage. What am I going to do? She's like, if I dance right now, I'm going to tank because they were incredible. And I know that. So she decided to sing. And of course, we all know Ella Fitzgerald, legendary jazz singer. And before that, she was totally undiscovered. And that was all based on adaptability, i.e. impulsivity. And so, if there's something that anyone wants to take away from this podcast, that they can start thinking about number one is, what are you more likely to be comfortable with? How do you operate? Are you more of an impulsive individual, or are you more of a disciplined individual? And then think about how you can be less so strictly, and how you can integrate the other one. Like, for example, growing up, I was an impulsive dude. I failed 15 classes in college, had to go to summer school just to make it through. I was playing, volleyball with the girls' volleyball team, every chance I got, rather than actually going to class. I slept in classes I did go to. I didn't do homework. And then I went to design school afterwards, and I discovered my passion. And then I didn't hang out with anybody. And all I did was design and design and design. Like, waking hours, I dreamed design. I'm not even exaggerating. And now, 10 years later, I realized that discipline has been so powerful in my life, and so different from how I grew up. I actually am too disciplined, and I have had to work in the last year specifically on improving my adaptability. Like, if I had expectations of how my day was going to go, get up, exercise, meditate, read, make food, then go to work, then do, X, Y, and Z, that if, my dog Luigi was sick, it was hard for me. I was upset that my routine was broken. And I had to realize that there's power in adaptability. Bruce Lee's famous quote of "be like water," right? You put water in a teapot, it becomes the teapot. You put water in a teacup, it becomes the teapot. Flow like water, be like water. That really resonates. So all that's to say is, balancing your discipline and impulse is one key element that I found was a distinguishing factor in people who have really risen to the top and excelled and achieved, greatness.
I love that, Joey. I love the story that you told, and I love that relationship that you're able to connect, between being disciplined. You do have to have a game plan, you do have to have structure, but you do also have to have that, like you said, flexible, adaptable, creative loose end. Otherwise, you're so fixed, you're not really going to be growing, and I find you see now even more businesses starting to understand that, where they'll do like on a Friday, like genius hour. They'll allow like their employees that time maybe to be a little less disciplined and more creative, and kind of impulsive and think of, okay, what is like the next, thing that we should, work on here, and they have better questions and prompts and you're starting to see now in some areas where people are starting to understand the impact of creativity and how much we have to start embracing it and kind of going there. So anyways, I really love that law that you've connected there between discipline and impulsivity. I love it. So something that, Joey, I just want to move to is, like I had said, you've worked with some incredible, world-class performers. And I know you worked closely with best-selling author James Clear, of Atomic Habits. And I've actually spoken about him a lot on the show. He's had a huge impact on kind of my life in terms of habits. And so a question that I have for you is, are there any memorable highlights that you like to share with our listeners about working with him?
I think James, he is described by people that know him as a machine. I didn't know James Clear at all when I met him. Literally had no clue. I was sort of thrown into a retreat. I was actually the odd man out. It was a retreat in Colorado and I was invited, and it was a bunch of people who are essentially writers and content creators of sorts, speaking on various subjects. And then there was me. It was a product guy. And there was supposed to be one other product guy. And that guy at the last second bailed out. I'm not exactly sure why. So I went. And I could not relate to anyone. I didn't know anyone. And James and this other gentleman, Josh Kaufman, they were both gracious. As I am clearly the odd man out, I'm also just a different dude. I'm from the East Coast. They were all Midwest, a little bit more chill. I'm type A and I'm a nerd. And this has nothing to do with work, but I think just James took the time to talk to me and get to know me. And, again, I had no idea who the guy was. And Josh Kaufman took the time to know me. And I think that speaks more about, his character, both of their characters, than anything, I could tell you about working together. Ultimately, good dudes, good humans, very focused individuals, both of them. If you haven't read Josh Kaufman's The Personal MBA, it's an incredible book. It's like literally an MBA in a book. Highly recommend it. And How to Fight a Hydra is also another book by Josh. And we know James Clear's Atomic Habits, of course. And so I think that's a good sign, you're following someone, you respect someone who deserves it. I'll say that.
I love that. Awesome. Something that I want to move to here, Joey, as you know, the purpose of this podcast is to inspire millions of people to achieve greatness and enhance their overall personal well-being. So what is your definition of greatness?
I think it's just happiness. I think it's just happiness. We started, early on when we were talking, you mentioned a couple people and I said, honestly, I don't know who they are. And for me, my happiness is really just doing my thing. I don't follow much outside of my world. I couldn't name, big authors. I couldn't name people sharing ideas that are probably incredible, unless someone in my life recommends books to me. And I think that has done me a service of, I'm only comparing against myself and I'm generally enjoying. I get, the benefit is that I tend to wander onto my own path by doing so. And there's downsides too, like not knowing a great idea that comes from a great author. So there's give and take. But, for me, greatness is happiness. And that is expressed for me as just doing my thing and enjoying it.
I love that. I think that's a beautiful definition. I love that you said happiness and doing things that, really light you up and that make you feel good. So that's awesome. And Joey, who is a future guest that you would like to see on this show?
That's a good question. Who's a future guest I would like to see on the show? Stephen King, not necessarily his writing. Like, I'm actually not into scary stuff. I've read the books that he's written that aren't scary, and I've really enjoyed them. But the creator, Stephen King, is prolific, and just the dude tries new things all the time. And I would love to hear more about how Stephen King does Stephen King things. And like, for me, there's never enough of that. Like, the dude is just impressive. So Stephen King.
Well, I will do my best, to get Stephen King on. And when that day comes, I'll be sure, Joey, to give you a holla and kind of let you know that he's on the pod.
Sweet.
And Joey, just before we kind of wrap up, where's the best place for my listeners to connect with you online? Maybe check out your book, your newsletter.
Sure. Check out The Laws of Creativity at joeycofone.com/book. We talked about Baronfig a lot. You could go to baronfig.com and check that out. And of course, say hello on Instagram and Twitter at Joey Cofone. Happy to see what you're up to.
Awesome, Joey. So I will be sure to, include all that in the podcast notes. And Joey, I really want to take this time. Really, really cool to see you, launch this book and even just hear from you today, about your wisdom and life lessons. And I really want to take this last moment, to really thank you for being here today, and thank you for your time, and thank you for everything that you've done for both myself as well as my listeners.
Ben, thank you, man. I mean, number one, your last name is incredible. Number two, you have a personality to match. It's been a pleasure chatting. And number three, time is a finite resource. So I thank you for giving me your time as well.
Thank you for listening to the Living Your Greatness podcast. If this show has added value, please subscribe, leave a rating, and make a review.